In this case, an individual who was exhibiting signs of mental illness. On May 21st at 5:30 in the morning, LASD deputies responded to a distress call of an elderly woman in a Malibu mobile home park. The SEB SWAT command used every means available to them while maintaining communication with the subject, who was a 74-year-old woman in a deteriorating mental state. She was brandishing a weapon and had taken over a neighboring mobile home. She was defiant, rambling, and resistant, and armed with a revolver. At one point, she burrowed under a neighboring mobile home. Our crisis negotiations team, a full-duty SEB SWAT team, command staff, and specialized equipment were brought in. Due to her position under the mobile home, there was no safe access for the deputies to get close enough without provoking a deadly confrontation. Under fire, the team continues to maintain communication with the subject via a robot, and over the course of the next 22 hours, this team deploys every means available to them with a peaceful resolution in mind. They deployed tear gas, light and sound diversion, water from a fire engine, foam projectiles, pepper spray, and a taser. All were used, but with no effect, which is often the case in dealing with people in a mental health crisis. 13 hours into the situation, she tells the team that she lost her weapon. She begins to move toward the SWAT team, but as she nears, a team member sees her gun and she fires 2 more rounds. It was 18 hours into the operation that the command staff decided no more chemical agents or less lethal impact devices should be used. She has shown zero reaction to any of it, and the cumulative effect of more could seriously injure or possibly kill her. The situation had reached a critical pivot point. Doing nothing was not an option. Dozens of innocent families at this mobile home park had been displaced, including children. The team also believed that the suspect had at least 1 live round left in her weapon. Yet the team also had no way to know whether the subject was injured or deteriorating at that point. Then 22 hours into the situation, at 3:30 in the morning, a tactical plan is approved to send 5 team members underneath the house to physically take hold of the subject. But in order to fit into the space, they would have to remove all of their protective gear, including vests and helmets, and they would not carry weapons. In short, they would be at a tremendous disadvantage. We now know that this ended peacefully. It would be a mischaracterization to say that the SWAT team was held at bay. The Special Enforcement Bureau's SWAT team held themselves at bay out of an overriding desire to end the incident without having to resort to using deadly force. While there's a national dialogue, and dialogue that I welcome, over the so-called militarization of police in our country, I'd like to note that military operations include acceptable casualty rates. However, our SWAT operations are designed to the exact opposite. Suspects, even those who are shooting at us, are fellow citizens with constitutional protections, not enemy combatants. In every confrontation, there's a continuum where the command staff weighs the tactical factors of preserving public safety with the human factors, in this case of exhaustion and uncertainty about the physical and mental condition of a 74-year-old woman with imminent danger to the public and themselves. I'd now like to introduce Commander Dave Halm, who'll go into a little bit more detail. Dave.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I was out there as the tactical commander for the entire operation. I just wanted to talk about a couple of things after we took the person into custody. When we did approve the plan, we were successful in getting, as the sheriff mentioned, getting the 5 members of the team under the mobile home to pull her out, and again, we got her out without incident. One of the things to note that is pretty unique to the Sheriff's Department is we have paramedics that are actually with the SEB team. So they're there to treat not only an injured deputy, but a suspect that might be injured too. So we were able to get her medical treatment immediately. The paramedics on the scene immediately began to treat her. They treated her for what they thought was hypothermia. That was later confirmed by the doctors at the hospital. We did find the firearm that she was in possession of under the trailer, and it did in fact have 1 round left in it that could have been used against the deputies. I also want to talk about how in this particular incident, no rounds were fired by SEB. Since 2013, we've had several incidents where rounds have been fired by suspects at our Special Enforcement Bureau, but they have not returned fire in most of those incidents, and the suspects are taken into custody without injury. They eventually surrender. So you can see that the team is not in a hurry to bring this to an end if we think we can peacefully resolve it. And again, we were out there 22 hours, and these guys, we just continued to work the problem and figure out what we could do. We had many plans. We tried many things that didn't work, but the team never gave up. I just want to talk about that. As the sheriff mentioned, there were several times when we started to go in, but because of the technology that we had, and we were also able to see the suspect, she was actually lying in wait for them, waiting for them to enter under this mobile home. So I think that speaks to the bravery and the way that this thing came to an end with these 5 deputies willing to take all their protective gear off and their weapons and then go under that trailer and pull her out, because we knew time was of the essence and something had to be done. So they did a great job, and I couldn't be prouder of them, and it's just nice to be out there with them. Sure, and now I'm going to bring up Lieutenant Bruce Chase, who was the acting captain for that particular incident. He was in the command post with us the entire time. And he'll take any tactical questions or anything like that that you have that he can answer without obviously going into too much detail about how we conduct these operations.
Can you spell your name for us, please?
Yeah, it's David, D-A-V-I-D, H-A-L-M.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm Lieutenant Bruce Chase, one of the SWAT commanders at the Special Enforcement Bureau, and I was the senior SEB officer on scene. We'd rather not have direct questions to the deputies behind me. These guys definitely acted heroically, but as you can understand, they're not the ones that want to get up here and tout their own heroics. But I can answer any questions you have to the best of my ability on the tactics and the procedures we use that day.
Lieutenant, just to be clear then, kind of for comparison's sake, given the circumstances and given the fact that this woman was armed, were you within your rights to shoot her? Had the circumstances gone the other way?
There were a number of times throughout the incident, beginning with the first officers on scene or deputies on scene from Lost Hills Station, who observed the individual with a handgun, pointed it at firefighters, pointed it at the deputies. But I think you can all realize the disconnect on the deputies' part when they see an elderly female. This started out as a medical distress call. So they would have been, throughout this entire ordeal, there were a number of times, and in many of our incidents, where we could use deadly force if we wanted to defend ourselves, but we choose not to.
And what was the pivotal point?
In this particular instance, we'd exhausted all means to attempt to persuade the individual to come out from where she was. Tear gas was ineffective. Anything dealing with pain compliance was ineffective. She had a loaded weapon, but we were at a point where the only other option would just be to sit there and wait her out. But again, this whole incident started with an elderly female in medical distress. We weren't specifically prepared to make a judgment on what her intentions were. She obviously had tried to shoot the team at one point, but in our minds, if we could possibly resolve this without resorting to deadly force, we were going to do that. If we waited any longer, and as it turned out, they told us later, if we had waited much longer, she was suffering from the effects of the elements, having been out for 18, 20 hours, 22 hours at the end point, where we needed to get her into custody. Our only other option would have been to sit there and wait for her to expire, because we wouldn't have been able to tell. We had surveillance devices underneath where we could watch her actions, but we would have no way of knowing whether she was sleeping, dying, or dead at any point. So eventually we were going to have to go underneath and get her anyway. These guys behind me decided at great personal risk to do that while she was still alive.
How many times did she point a gun at someone, and how many times did she fire?
She had a 6-shot revolver and fired a total of 5 times throughout this incident. She had 1 live round left. She pointed the gun at various people numerous times throughout the incident.
Had this happened anywhere else, and perhaps instead of a 70-year-old woman, she might have been someone younger, someone of a different race or color. I mean,
Sure,
The question is,
I understand,
why
I
did you
understand the
restrain
question, given the current climate and the national dialogue on the disparate treatment of different individuals based on their race. I can assure you that SEB's tactics have nothing to do with race. Myself and some of these men behind me have been shot at a number of times, and the last thing on your mind when you're being shot at, you could really care less about what the color of the skin of the person who's doing that is. Also, we've taken persons of various race into custody without incident. A year and a half ago in the city of Linwood, a 68-year-old female black woman barricaded herself in her home after pointing a gun at deputies and neighbors. And we were able to peacefully resolve that without a shot fired. In a considerably less amount of time, based on the circumstances, we were just fortunate in that case that the person didn't go underneath a house. This was very problematic in this particular incident based on the physical state of the person we were dealing with and where she happened to end up. There was very little available to us to safely go under there without physically putting ourselves in harm's way. So as law enforcement officers, as SWAT officers, usually we have techniques and weapons and specialized equipment that can keep us out of harm's way, which is why we don't immediately have to resort to deadly force. In this particular case, there was no safe way. So sending those guys underneath this home, and it's been called a trailer or a mobile home. It's approximately 1,500 square feet underneath this house. This was a rather large mobile home development. So this was a considerable risk to send them under, but they're willing to take it.
so what was their strategy? Did they come from behind? I mean, can
We'd
you
rather
expand
not,
on,
understandably, we'd rather not speak to the specific tactics
can you
that were
expand on
used.
how long that took? Like, did they, as they were going in, did she ever raise her gun at them? Just details of what might have happened that we couldn't have seen.
At the point we took advantage of the time we believed to have to go in, we did still have surveillance cameras underneath the home. We were reasonably believed she didn't have the weapon in her hand at the time, but throughout the incident she had picked it up, put it down, set it next to her. But they moved rather rapidly once they initiated the plan. We were prepared to use deadly force if we had to. It would have been extremely depressing to everybody involved in that incident if it had ended in the use of deadly force. However, in this particular case, while we were prepared to use deadly force when those officers went underneath the home, but they were going head first against an armed suspect with no tactical protection, no helmets, no vests, and she had the ability to shoot one of them.
Can you tell us about her mental state at the time? Why she was there?
There were different discussions with her throughout the day, and I personally was able to hear some of them. It was clear that she was in a confused, delusional state, and we weren't dealing with somebody that we could deal with in a rational manner, which is why we realized we could not conclude this with any cooperation on her part because she wasn't in a mental state to act in her own best interest.
Is this something that she's had an ongoing problem with, or?
That, I can't speak to her medical condition.
Can I coattail on, was she diagnosed with a mental illness or was she a dementia patient?
I'm not prepared personally to speak to the mental condition of her. I wouldn't want to mischaracterize any of the exact medical condition. That's better left for us.
Is she still hospitalized?
Yes, she is.
So just to clarify, the deputies, they had taken off some of their equipment, but they were still armed?
We had arm protection available, but in this particular instance, like I say, we usually, the way we operate, we prefer to operate where there's very little chance of our people being hurt. We have the equipment and the technology and the ability to do that. When in certain situations. In this situation, based on where she was, they had to remove most of the individuals that were going to physically take hold of her didn't have the ability to have that protection.
Did she resist when they finally came within, touching?
Not enough to overcome being
But she did try
handcuffed.
to resist?
They were able to handcuff her. She's a 74-year-old woman, even though she wasn't reacting to any of the ordinance we were using. When these guys behind me took a hold of her, they were able to handcuff her and then move her out without a fight. So there wasn't like a great struggle.
Where did she get the gun?
That I'm not prepared to talk about at this time.
Why?
Either. I don't know. That's why. Yeah, the detectives handle those questions. I'm just not prepared because I don't have the
Is
information.
she the registered owner of the gun?
I believe she is, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
I know the family doesn't want to be identified, but can they fill in some of these, or answer some of these questions?
Afterwards, I believe they should be able to, as well as any of the detectives or the station personnel that are handling the actual investigation.
So you, LT, you characterize this as a win?
Yes, I would characterize it as a win.
It's my understanding she wasn't a resident of the mobile home park.
She-
lived nearby.
No, she was a resident of the mobile home park. She just lived in another space.
Okay, so that wasn't her house.
That was not her house, which again made it problematic too, because some of the techniques we have, we wanted to avoid damaging the person's house where she was, if we could, but ultimately we couldn't.
How much did this incident cost the department, just in terms of people's time and any damage that may have been done to the house underneath, or?
We're not sure, but you know, what price can you put on the life?
And there was mention earlier of her taking over a neighboring house. That was the house she ended up under?
Yeah, the house she ended up under was not her own. So there were actually people in that mobile home when she went into their backyard at first. She ended up in an alcove, and they were evacuated. And then as you can see, the mobile home is right in the center of the complex. It's directly across from the community center. So there were all the families that you can see on that picture were all forced out of their homes.
And earlier, it was said that she did suffer from hypothermia. Did she have any other injuries or ailments due to being under the house?
Yeah, she had various injuries from some of the ordnance we had used, and she was, from my understanding, at the onset of hypothermia.
Okay, so she was hit by the phone bullets, or what was she?
Less lethal impact rounds, yes.
Who made the original call?
The original call came from her, where the mobile home where she lives, and it was a call of an elderly woman having difficulty breathing.
Okay, so it was a family member that made the call, or she made the call?
I believe she made the call.
And did she live there alone or with family?
That, I don't know, if I could have the captain of Lost Hills Station might be better prepared to answer those questions.
What will she be charged with?
Identify yourself, please.
Captain Patrick Davron, D-A-V-O-R-E-N.
The original call, 911 call came in, it was from her, right?
I don't know if it was from her, a possible neighbor. I don't know who it came from.
Do we know how old she is exactly? Did you say?
74.
70.
And her race, she's white.
Yes.
I'm sorry, do you know if she lived there alone or not?
I don't know that.
We're told, yes, she does. She did live there alone.
Okay, then when deputies first got there, or you sent out an ambulance, obviously, a rescue squad. So what did they encounter when they first got there?
The paramedics and ambulance got there along with my first arriving deputy, and they saw her and she looked like she was ready to faint. So the paramedics walked over and tried to prop her up, and that's when she grabbed one of the paramedics' arms. And my deputy, the first deputy, was walking toward that, and that's when they saw her pull out a revolver from her pocket, and that's when she fled toward the apartment, or the mobile home that they eventually found her at.
So from any initial contact with her, did it look like she did indeed have a medical condition or any kind of breathing problems, or was that a ruse?
That's what the paramedics said in the report when they were interviewed, that it looked like she was possibly getting ready to faint.
Are there gonna be charges following?
The investigation is pending, ongoing, so she's still in the hospital, so the investigators are still looking into that.
I'm sorry, did you say what her condition was currently? Is she stable or
She's stable.
what is she being treated for?
Hypothermia a few days ago, now it's just the injury to the hand, so the doctors want to take a close look at her.
And I'm sorry, did you say foam bullets were used?
They're a combination of the different ordinances we have are foam and or rubber.
Is she being treated for her mental state? I don't know if it's an illness or, I mean, is that part of it?
Yeah, you can understand, we can't go into a person's medical history or that kind of thing they're being treated for, but they're taking a holistic look at what her needs are and addressing those needs.
So is it accurate for us to say that she, I mean, how do we?
Yeah, how do we best characterize this?
She had a manic break.
Distress.
She had a manic break, and
Manic break.
that's according to family? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone for coming. Thank you.
Thank you all.
You break off stuff later. Thanks.
Nick, go ahead.
Oh, yeah.